So great to have everybody back. And Anna, you joined us. Greetings. Welcome. Glad
Good
you
morning.
could
Good
make it.
morning.
Hi,
Thank
Bill.
you.
I'm going to put everybody on mute except anybody who would like to get us going. One of the joys that came to me, or I learned about just a few seconds ago, was even though I was away last week from the gathering, giving a retreat up in Michigan, some of you still got together here and got to know each other and shared a little bit. And that's a great thing. I think anytime if I do go away and I'm not in a position to get on Zoom for the gathering, those who want to can still meet. And I think there's a great benefit for the little community that we have here of what I would call intentional disciples, those seeking a deeper and wider vision of whatever religious upbringing they may bring to the table. That's what the gathering's all about for those of you who are relatively new. Very blessed to have three of my former teammates from the Notre Dame baseball team with us. And I mean, especially heartened by the fact that this athletic bond that we had and this mutual admiration on the baseball diamond has deepened into an appreciation of ourselves as persons in God, or at least in the transcendent, as we're kind of all feeling our way towards that. So the greatest joy for me is to see people that I gather with continue to gather with each other, become friends, and become one in God. And I know when I had my first Mass in 1981, I said, my whole ministry is to create a world of friends of Phil. And then we get together and we talk about that which gives direction to our lives. And that's why I love talking with anybody, because if you tell me you're passionate about golf or you're passionate about nematodes, there was a priest in my community who loved studying nematodes. I knew nothing about nematodes, but when he talked about it, I could see that God was using nematodes to give him a taste of the infinite and to fulfill his longing for knowledge, truth, beauty, and goodness. And so everything in life and the passions we have, whether it's baseball, football, golf, even mistaken passions like pornography or drug addiction, these are all yearnings of the whole of the human soul, which is infinite, and we crave satisfaction, we crave fulfillment, we crave communion. We want to find that person or that activity which will give us a state of perpetual euphoria. And that desire for euphoria is the life of God within us. I can talk to any person within 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and show them that God is closer to them than they are to themselves, because all you have to identify is your leading passion in life. And don't mistake that passion as God, mistake that as a sacramental instrument of tantalization that God is placing in your heart. Because what will happen is as I follow my passion, whether it's for making money or doing pornography or playing baseball, I will reach a point of diminishing returns with any passion that I follow. And at that point, there will ensue a time of bewilderment, really, and of disorientation. It certainly happened to me. I mean, as I look back on my life, my whole life from childhood, only because it was the only thing I could be proud of was playing baseball. So I dedicated all my energy, and it blinded me to my own limitations. I always thought I was the best player on the field and in any game. And that wasn't always the case, but I believed it. It's like Jack Nicklaus. That some guy asked him one time after a tournament, he said, "How did you miss that putt?" He says, "What missed putt? I didn't miss any putts." He literally didn't see it. He just didn't believe I did it. But the point is that when we follow our passions and we meet our goals, I mean, you can see this. I was listening to some Notre Dame podcasts of former Notre Dame football players this week. And one of them in particular, I guess he actually wasn't a Notre Dame football player. His son was a Notre Dame football player. Jesse, getting too warm in here. and he was, and his name is escaping me now. He was a very famous, he was nominated for the NFL Hall of Fame. He's one of the top 25 all-time running backs in the NFL. He went to Syracuse. His son ended up going to Notre Dame and was a great runner for Notre Dame. Why can't I think of his name? In any event, he was talking about, and he made the Pro Bowl several times, and the people, the Notre Dame guys who were interviewing him said, you know, when you were at Notre Dame, your aspiration was always to get to the league, by which they mean the NFL. He says, yeah, that's right. He says, and then when you get to the NFL, your goal is to start. You're a rookie, you come in, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. First you want to be a rotating player, then you want to start. Then you want to make all pro. Then you want to make the Pro Bowl. Then you want to make the Hall of Fame. And he says, meanwhile, you're dealing with injuries. Every week they're bringing in new guys. If you miss one play in practice, they're wondering whether or not they're going to find another substitute for you. He said, the pressure is so enormous. He said, I made tons of money. And all of a sudden I got cut. And he said, everything that I aspired to was pulled out from underneath me. He says, then I lost my motivation to play. And he said, I realized I had so identified myself with the game of football that I had no idea who I was or what I was created to do. I just knew that I had internalized this ideal somehow. It had served me well for a long time. And all of a sudden, it lost its ability to. And I would say, you know, Richard Rohr has written extensively about the first half of life and the second half of life. One of my favorite movies is The Natural with Robert Redford, the story about a baseball player who kind of missed his, you know, the first part of his life is a lot of mistakes, especially in love and even in baseball. They pass him up. But then in his 40s, he's finally recognized as the great player he is, and he comes in and blitzes the league and is a phenom for a year or two. And then he finally gets back together with the love of his life that he left to play baseball. I can't remember the story exactly, but she had been married and divorced, and he had been married and divorced, and they finally get back together. And that was really his first love, even though he will find with that love the same dynamic that I'm describing now. But anyway, in this romantic ending to this novel, he says to her, I'm so sorry I screwed it up so badly the first time around. And her answer to him is a perfect description of what I'm trying to describe here. She says, well, the way I look at it is we have one life to live and one life to learn and one life to live. And the learning process always ends in a period of disillusionment. We follow the woman, the man, the career that we thought we wanted. And really, I mean, the whole story of spirituality, the whole story of conversion is that more or less abrupt transition from a mind-made or self-made identity, which always breaks down. I get older. I mean, you see it in actresses all the time. I was watching Kathy Lee Gifford the other day talk about balance of nature. She can't even smile. She's had so much Botox, you know, or take a Nancy Pelosi, whoever you want. The eternal search for perpetual youth, women investing in their beauty, men investing in their fitness, men investing in their careers, people investing in their marriage. No one person, because we are mysteries to each other. We come from the Trinity, and the Trinity is a triune mystery of absolute otherness. This is the great paradox of Christianity, which introduces an element into the world that neither Judaism nor Islam or any other Oriental religion has, and that is that perfect unity differentiates perfectly. In other words, the more united I am with someone, the more my difference from them stands out. And for most people, because difference for us almost inevitably results in alienation or animosity. When we get together as two diverse people in a marital union or a friendship, and the glow of the transcendent, which is uniting us in the first place, and that sense of belonging that I talked about earlier, That and it comes from the Trinity. It's a source of unity. It's a desire for union. It comes to us because we're made in the image and likeness of God. And God, from a Christian standpoint, is a triune communion of personal, interpersonal love. So the Father and the Son are united in an indissoluble, ineffable, ecstatic act of spiritual intercourse, from which the Holy Spirit proceeds as a third dimension, making the I and thou of the Father a we. And we come from that. So we are created for we-ness with others. But here's the Christian difference. Unlike Buddhism, where the drop just disappears back into the ocean, or the Hindu, that the cow and you are the same because all is God. Christianity believes, no, unity doesn't mean the dissolution of difference. In fact, just the opposite. Real unity means the absolute respect for the absolute otherness of the other. The Father and the Son are not the same. They are completely different from each other. There's a sense in which, and mystics of the church have told us this, there's a sense in which at every moment, so to say, in the life of the Trinity, the Father looks at the Son and says, it's as if I'm seeing you for the first time. And I spent some time with my son. Dorothy's on the call. Dorothy, I can't wait to hear our conversation this afternoon, because I know I'll not even be able to get out of there because of the joy that you experienced when Ben and I were there together with you. But in that unity, you see the complete otherness. And so there's no attempt for me, for example, to control my son. He is one with me, but he's entirely his own person. And everything that he has comes from me, but he's going to give it to the world in a way that only he can give it. So if I try to control him or mold him in my own image and likeness, it's not gonna work. And that's why when I let the other person be themselves in a relationship, the intimacy actually increases. It's when I glom onto them in a kind of desperate codependent embrace, and I don't want to let them out of my sight because I say to them, you complete me. There is a sense, certainly, in which that is true. We are completed. We are more ourselves in relationship with the other than we are alone. We're not meant to be alone. We're meant to be with others. But that together with the others has to also perfect the otherness of the other. So the more breathing room I can put into my relationship, the more breath, the more freedom I can infuse in the relationship, the deeper the intimacy becomes. How many couples have I talked to on the verge of divorce? And I've been there myself, been there, done that. Why? Because mother becomes smother and love becomes oppression. And there's no breathing room. It's a dead corpse. The life of God. You remember when God made Adam a living being, he breathed space into him. He breathed breath into him. How many people say, he doesn't give me any breathing room. She's always right in my face. I can't just step back a minute, will you please? Give me a little room to operate here. Well, love gets very confining when it doesn't understand that otherness is essential to intimacy. So none of those things are taught, of course, and we don't know any of those things. So we have to be, so most of us, I think everybody, given the condition of the human race, undergoes did you hear this growing up in grade school? I certainly didn't. And maybe there's no way to avoid it. I mean, what do teenagers just want to blend together? They want to enmesh, they want to become one, and they want to do it as soon as possible. And when you do that, then it works for a while. It's like an addiction. They say when a drug addict or an alcoholic starts out on their path, the first drink is 100% joy and no downside. And depending on how the course of it goes, then it starts to be 80, then I have my first hangover and I throw up all night, and I make the first time I say the toilet prayer, with your head bent over the toilet. God, I promise if you let me be better, I'll never do this again. And of course, the next night you're right back at it. And so that denial works. That's the definition really of original sin, is kind of denial. And we're talking here about the transition from the first stage of life to the second stage of life, or really from accumulating a false sense of who we are based on our internalized notions of what the church has told us, or society has told us, or our parents have told us, or our teachers have told us. We try to live up to somebody else's image of what's going to bring euphoria and fulfillment. Here we go. And that works for a while. It is like a drug. Baseball was like a drug for me. It worked for a while. It gave me many moments of euphoria, and then with a crash, it let me down. And some people have to experience that in marriage. Some people experience that in business. Some people experience it in both. Sometimes I have to experience it in my kids. I'm living for my kids and they let me down. They end up in jail. So at some point, life conspires to give you the invitation to let go and let God, even if you never use the word God. Life itself, people don't need to use the word God to communicate God to people. In fact, I was sharing with Dorothy just recently, I've come to the conclusion that the best way a person can begin to teach the world about God these days is never to mention the word, simply to focus on the transcendental yearning within every human desire, and then point out that when that human desire leads to fulfillment that ultimately goes bad, that's your first clue from the source of your being that there's a deeper connection here that you're searching for that was granted to you. You got a taste of it with that marriage. You got a taste of it with that athletic career. You got a taste of it with raising those kids, but they're all gone now. That career is all gone now. The money is all gone now. But the desire for that communion is still there. Where can I go to satisfy that desire for communion? And that's why 12-step groups are so powerful these days. It's why Starbucks has become the new Sunday liturgy of most people. In the good old days here in St. Louis, you would see Catholic churches packed for people listening to the gospel, which is the liturgy of the word, and then they would receive Holy Communion. Now, granted, even in those days, the majority of the men were standing at the back saying, what's the latest time I can come in and it still count? And what's the earliest time I can leave and still not go to hell? So, and I have to say, with very minor emendations, that mentality still obtains within the Catholic Church. I had a request yesterday to baptize some babies. Why? Because their mother is afraid of what might happen if they're not baptized. So there's a whole framework here that is out of whack, and that's the framework that we're trying to either dismantle or reconstruct in the Wednesday gatherings, and we're not going to do that construction work this week. But I want to say that in the good old days, there was a framework that held together, and it involved listening to the word of God and receiving something, the bread and wine for communion. And that took place in all Christian churches, Catholic or not, to some extent and in some way. Well, today, all those churches are, for the most part, empty. Not all of them, but for the most part. The ones that are holding on are pretty much going in the direction of becoming Catholic Amish, going back to the Latin Mass, hoping a resurrection of the Baroque liturgy will infuse the modern world with hope. And it's not in any way evangelical. It's not in any way ecumenical. It's not in any way transformational, except for those who find that particular form of devotion connecting them closer with God. And for those who do, great. But it's not going to work for the universal church. So churches are mostly empty, but there are still Sunday gatherings. They're in coffee shops. Go down to any coffee shop. You'll see guys reading the New York Times. That's become the new Bible of a secular age, or whatever preferred newspaper you have. And for some people, they're Kindle. But people catching up on the news, that's the liturgy of the word. And then having a scone and a cup of coffee with strangers, which is what you were doing in church. you're sitting next to strangers, but you feel we're kind of bonded here. We love coming to St. Andrew's Church. Well, how many Starbucks have I gone to over the years where I know all the regulars, don't know any of their names? Hi, yeah. Oh, you're here. You want the regular? You want the latte with the, so everybody knows everybody. It's like Cheers, the new church has become a version of Cheers. So I know this is a little wandering at this point, and I know, Gretchen, you had a question, but let's come back to the original. The original thing is that the period of disillusionment is a really important time, because you can kind of go in one of two ways at that point. You can try to do again what you were doing before with continuing diminishing results, and that ends up in a life of depression and sadness and victimhood. Or you can realize, it really takes an awakening to realize that it's very hard, really, isn't it, to realize that that even at 65 years old or 70 years old, I still have a yearning for something that is going to give me meaning, and it's good when a person discovers that.
I think your Wednesday meeting.
Well, yeah, I have an outlet. I have the Wednesday meeting. What do other people have? I don't know, but so I'm kind of drawing a blank here. I've said what I have to say in a way. Gretchen has a question. She'll get us
through. It's not a question, it's a comment. The last time we were together, you talked about receiving communion in both forms. And or even Earl and I had not been taking the wine for different reasons, and one of them was germs. I remember that discussion, but for me, I was an alcoholic, and so I didn't take the wine. But after you talked to me, I went and then I did. I've been taking the precious blood when it's offered, and it was just, for me, it was a wonderful feeling that I was getting a more fulfillment of getting the sacrament.
Good. So you probably can't hear Gretchen in the background. I'll just rephrase for those of you who are on Zoom today, and thanks for coming, for joining, for being together like this. It's really great. Gretchen was reminding me that in my parish here, it's always a little bit of a grief for me, and I'll narrow this down to a little bit of a religious focus here for just a minute, because then I'll try to expand it, because for me, religion, until it gives way to a spiritual penumbra, penumbra is a halo beyond until you get to the glory of what religion is pointing to, you're just dealing with a dead letter, and you're just dealing with a corpse, really. But in any event, for those who come to the Eucharist, at the Last Supper, Jesus, he passed around the cup and he said, take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is the cup of my blood, the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for all, so that your sins may be forgiven. As if that weren't an indication of God's universally salvific will. I don't know what was, but in any event, it's not interpreted that way always. But anyway, he said to the disciples here, so it would have been a little odd if Peter said, no, thanks. I just want the bread. I'll take your body. I don't care much for your blood. I think I'll take the lifeless corpse. I won't take the blood that goes with it. But I'm in my little Catholic church here. So these people have always been taught, quite rightly, that and they were, for 50 years that I grew up, when you went to Holy Communion, you're only given the host, they didn't have the cup till Vatican II in 1964 or whatever it was. But now we do. So, and I'm never one to put pressure on anybody for anything. I think anything that is forced is not going to stick anyway. So why should I try to preach at somebody? if you're interested in learning, I'll talk to you all day about my experience, strength, and hope. But if you're not interested, I don't have any stake in trying to make you less other from me than you already are, because I see the otherness of the Trinity everywhere. And to me, it's beautiful. There is nobody I love more than a person who doesn't believe in God, because I know they're a miracle just waiting to happen. But they're a miracle already happening. They're just not aware of it. Anything I do is just make them aware of what's already happening in them, and maybe help explain the inner dynamics of it a little more so that they can increase the joy of it a little bit. So, but in my church, I take the occasion every once in a while, if I feel like it's not going to be too awkward or abrupt or negative, to say something. I usually lie and just frame it in a positive way. Like a couple of weeks ago, I said, it gives me so much joy, which is a total lie. I was saying this from the altar. I said, it gives me so much joy to see so many more of you receiving from the cup at Holy Communion. I said, Jesus did say, take this, all of you, and he wants all of you. And I said, unless you're really afraid of germs, I said, I think your experience of receiving communion would be enriched if you gave it a try. But I'm glad to see so many more trying. Well, a few more tried. I guess they felt complimented. But since then, it's gone back down to its normal level. So it's kind of like telling them, turn your cell phones off when you come into church. They hear it for the first 2 weeks, and then they start ringing again. So once you reach the point of diminishing returns, you stop talking, kind of like parents should do. They should just shut up and let the kid make their own mistakes and be there to help them pick up the pieces when they crash and burn. But let me expand that little religious note about take this, all of you, and drink from it. I know, and Jesse, my coworker Jesse's sitting to my right here in the background, and she shared with me recently that when she went to communion recently, she had a new experience of the overwhelming presence of God. And remember, and here's where I'll really expand the Eucharist, because my favorite image of the Trinity, I don't think I have one of those in this room. There's an icon of the Trinity. I'm tempted to look at it in my photos, but I won't be able to find it. It's called the Sinai Pantocrator. It's a picture of Jesus, one of the very earliest icons ever, and his face. If you hold the holy card over one side of the face and look at the other, he's got, when he looks at you in this icon, his eyes are asymmetrical. There's one of his eyes is looking directly at you, and these icons are absolutely disarming is the word. A really good icon, as opposed to a statue, which we have in the Western Catholic Church. If you go into a Byzantine church or an Eastern Catholic church, you won't see statues. You'll see what look like paintings, and they don't call them paintings. They call them icon writings. Icon means an image of. And the Orthodox and the Eastern Church, the Eastern world, really, Russia, Ukraine, Greece, if you go to any of those countries and you see religious artwork, you will see what look like paintings, and they are egg tempera with all kinds of ground colors in them, from fibers and filaments and really plants. And it's really an elaborate process to write an icon or to paint an icon. And it is a mystical experience for the iconographer. And it is meant to be a sacrament of God's presence to people who look at an icon. And maybe next week I'll bring the one that I'm speaking of right now. But in this icon that I'm talking about, it's just the person of Christ, and he's holding the book of life in his left hand. He's holding it in his left arm. And every icon has multiple levels of mystical significance. But when Christ is holding the book of life, which holds the names of all the people in the world, remember, you hear about the books being opened, and you come up to the gates of St. Peter and he looks up your name in the book. Well, and there is a reference in the book of Revelation to the book of life. And everybody has taken that as kind of an accounting sheet at the gates of heaven, where he decides whether you come in or get sent somewhere else. And of course, that's not what it is, but that's how people picture it. but Jesus is holding the gift of life, but he's holding it in his left arm, which means that he's gathering to himself all those who are left out, all those who are, that everybody else has consigned to hell. He's holding them in the book of life. In his left arm, he is holding the sheep who have strayed, as it were. At least that's part of that symbolism there. And his eyes are going in two different directions. And that's why I'm often jumping back and forth between one thing and another in these gatherings, because internally my eyes are going in different directions as well. One eye is on those who have been formed into what I call a kind of crispy critter notion of Catholicism. There it is. Send it over here, Patty. Here's my dear Patty. She's really good at, this is the icon of Christ that I'm talking about. Can you all see it pretty well? Yeah. And if you can, I think even as I hold it here, you can kind of see how his eyes are asymmetrical. Can you see on our right side and his left side, his eye is looking directly at you. And his one eye is looking directly into your heart because he can see who you are. I know you and I love you and I see you as a way you don't even see yourself. But his other eye is looking off in the distance, and it's the eye of the prodigal father who is looking for his son who has been lost. And so while he's looking at those who are looking at him, which are those who are intentionally oriented towards God, he's also scanning the horizon for the lost sheep so that he can go out and rescue them. It's just a beautiful image of Christ. And so when I talk about something like the Eucharist, I mean, I have done gatherings. I mean, if there's a general consensus on the gathering, I'm always aware there are people on the gathering who may not be Catholic or who are so alienated from the Catholic Church, they really don't want to go into depth about Catholic sacramental theology. But I have done that, and I'm happy to do that because I believe that there is a whole vision of Catholic sacramentality that has never even been introduced into the Western Church because we're not familiar with the way the ancients did it in the Christian East. So I can do that at any time and love to do that, and have spent a lot of my adult life doing that at the college level and at the adult formation level. And there's nothing that I love to do more, but I know that very, very few people, even among practicing Catholics, even want a deeper vision of what the sacraments are meant to be. But if there's ever that desire on the gathering, I'm happy to repeat some of that for some of you who may be relative newcomers to the gathering. But let me look out of the eye that's looking over the horizon recently. But I should actually, I'm going to bring in for a second before I do that, bring in Jesse's, and I'll have, do you mind? I'm going to let Jessie share what she experienced, and then I'm going to comment on that a little bit and then expand it to what we were talking about at the beginning of the gathering, how the desire for euphoria in the heart of any person is actually a sacrament of Christ's real presence to them, even though they don't attend the Eucharist.
So at Mass this past weekend, I just got this overwhelming feeling when I went to before communion. I was in the pew and it just like came over me, and it just hit me about communion. It's God didn't tell, or Jesus didn't say, "Oh, I'm just kidding, come back," when he said, "This is my body, this is my blood." He didn't say, "I'm just kidding, come back," he was giving all of himself to us. He didn't like take a piece of his skin and say, "This is my body." He didn't cut himself and say, "This is my blood." What he was given to us was his divinity, was himself. He was giving all of us, or all of himself to us. And that hasn't left me since then. It's still overwhelming receiving communion now. It's not just a piece of bread. It's not just wine. It is Jesus. It's himself. And I don't know what else to say about that. It's so much more than what I'd never thought about communion before. When I went to receive communion, I never thought about it. And I wasn't thinking about it then. And it just like came over me. It's like, I am receiving all of Jesus. He's giving himself to each of us.
Thank you for sharing. So, hi, Barb. I'm glad you could join us. Great to see you. So I was doing a 2-day retreat in Michigan last week, and I'll try to parlay Jesse's sharing into this. So what Jesse was saying, I mean, she spoke for herself, so I'm not gonna tell you what she said. I'm gonna tell you how I heard her. One of the things that I heard in what Jesse shared with us was that her awareness is increasing, that whatever relationship it is that we have with Christ, in her case, mediated to her through the reception of Holy Communion. And I would say that that is the premier point of intercourse between the divine and the human worlds. I would say that it's mystically, we call it the mystical, in the East, they call it the mystical gathering or the mystical supper. But something similar happens in any time we get together. I talked about Starbucks before. And Jesus in Matthew 25 says, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. Anytime two people meet in communion, especially to sit down and have a cup of coffee together. You know, I married a woman from England, and one of the traditions I loved there was whenever there was a problem in the family, or whenever there was bad weather, or whenever you would run into a little bit, or even something was nice that happened, what the first words that come out of a real English person's mouth when something nice or something bad happens is, how about a spot of tea? And so you go into the kitchen, you put on the kettle, you sit down and you have a cup of tea. Now, what's tea? Nothing, right? But it's an instrument of communion, and it's an instrument of healing, and it's an instrument it's an introduction of a divine breath. It's a little space of breathing room, but the tea is important. She doesn't say, let's sit down and have a spot of an idea of tea. Let's actually have some tea, and let's have some, they call them biscuits, you know, so they get out these little tin containers, and we have a gathering here every Wednesday. We put out a little coffee, and today we put out some Boston cream pie. So the cookies are not always that elaborate. Yeah, who knew, right? But all these things, the bread and wine are the biscuits and the tea that God is putting out to bring people, to get them to. So when we come to the Eucharist, for example, or when we come to tea, or meet me for coffee, will you meet me for coffee? What's that saying to a person? That's saying to a person, come away from the insanity of the freaking world and let's meet in a different space. What's that space? That space is the space of God. Now, for people who know everything I'm saying here, you could transport that into a church, and you could have the kind of experience that Jesse had. But for those who can't transport that into the church, or see no relationship between having a cup of coffee with their friends and gathering with God over the instruments of Godification that he has given us in the Eucharist, that's what the Eucharist is. The Eucharist is meant to be a spot of tea that mystically, by the power of the Holy Spirit, turns those who consume it into what they consume. I guess I am going down the sacramental road here just a little bit, but a sacrament, as opposed to a meeting at Starbucks, not as opposed to a meeting of Starbucks. I'm going to comment on the meeting. See, my eye is oriented more towards Starbucks than it is right now towards the Eucharist. I know what the Eucharist does to people. I want everybody from Starbucks to come to Mass and receive what Jesse received, but they're not going to do that. And I'm not going to try to pressure them or compel them or convince them to do that. I'm not going to do that at all. The church, the Eucharist, the Catholic faith is meant to be absolutely altogether voluntary. It's like recovery. It's not for those who need it. It's for those who want it. And trying to compel somebody to get sober, or trying to compel somebody to become Catholic, or trying to compel somebody to go to communion, or to compel somebody to get their kids baptized is to be a countersign to the presence of God. It's to reinforce exactly the opposite of what the Eucharist is trying to do for people and to people. Wow. Okay. So all that being said, so let's talk just sacramentally here for a minute, then we'll go back to Starbucks because I want to operate from both eyes here. Okay. Sacramentally, what happens? We start this gathering out every week saying that little prayer from that statement of St. Athanasius, and not just his. Every church father said something similar. God became man so that men and women can become God. And he meant that quite literally. It doesn't mean we stop being human any more than it meant when Jesus became human that he stopped being divine. There's an inverse relationship here. Just as Jesus became human, in Christ, we become divine. We acquire a human nature. We acquire all the characteristics of God without being God as God is God. But we become God as we are able to resemble God. And we become God insofar as we are capable of becoming God as human beings, just as Jesus became human insofar as he was capable of becoming human as God. There. Ben, edit that out and make sure that gets put up on YouTube. That's my son and I were talking about doing videos together, and he said, if we record them and edit them, you can actually stop yourself and say, boy, that was really good. Make sure they hear that. And I say really good because it's not anything I ever premeditate. It just comes out, and it is really good. And I'm surprised and happy to hear it, just like the rest of you. Hope you're happy to hear it. So in any event, so there's a godification or a Christification process that takes place very explicitly and very intentionally. And if you come to the Eucharist with a heart wide open and a head understanding the mystery that you're entering into, insofar as you're capable of understanding it, if you enter into it with that kind of intentionality, you will have a mystical experience akin to the one Jesse is talking about. And an image for what is happening in that sacramental transfiguration. I call the sacraments episodes of transfiguration. They're not exchanges with God. Sacraments are not doing deals with God as most people imagine them to be. I go to Mass, you give me grace, I get into heaven because I'm now filled with sanctifying grace. My neighbor doesn't go to heaven because he's filled with the darkness of sin and it has not been flushed out with sanctifying grace. All of that is pure, unadulterated BS. Okay? But something does happen to me there. And the more I can increase my appreciation and apprehension of what is being done to me, I'm not giving God anything by going to church or going to Mass or going to prayer. I'm not giving God a damn thing. It's God himself getting my attention long enough so that he can saturate me with his own life. That's the meaning of Christianity. We come before God so God can make us so one with him that our human life becomes indistinguishable from that of his son. And that's a process, obviously, and it is facilitated and exacerbated by our willingness. Like Mary says, let it be done to me as you desire. Once a person finds that way of living, what they are meant to do becomes very clear to them very quickly. But I have to divest myself of every attachment and self-made, mind-made image of myself and of God that I've ever previously held. I have to become literally a child. I have to become a blank slate. I have to have the heart of a child. And I have to have utter and supreme confidence that the one who is giving himself to me is going to show me my original identity in him, such that I will be able to live from that place and find activities that fuel and support that place in a way that will bring maximum joy to me in this life, eternal joy in the next life, and fruitfulness and joy to every person I encounter along the way for as many years as I have left in this world. And when that begins to happen, even in a modest measure, it brings so much hope into your life. It's like receiving a new life. When I was listening to this NFL player, he discovered just by accident, on the verge of becoming a total drug addict and splurging his whole fortune on drugs because he was trying to drink himself into insensibility. He got a call from a friend of his and said, we need a cameo football player in a Hollywood movie. Would you be interested? And I should put a link in this for the podcast sometime, because he ended up having 3 lines in some movie that everybody remembers. I wished I could remember the movie. I wish I was a theater aficionado, but and the guy's interviewing him from Notre Dame. He tripped into this. He was drunk, and his buddy called him and said, "We need a guy to do 3 lines in a Hollywood movie. Would you be interested?" He said, "Yeah, I'd be interested. They'll pay me a little bit of money." This is the guy who was down. This is 1 year out of the NFL, and he's almost on Skid Row. So he goes out to Hollywood. They give him the 3 lines, and apparently these 3 lines have become famous. It's something like, "Have a good day, Larry." Do you recognize that movie? It was something like, "Have a good day, Larry." You know, whoever goes to movies, they all were laughing their heads off. And the guy, and he's had many, and since then he discovered, I've got a great talent for acting. Now he's a Hollywood movie producer. And he's still making inspiration. I mean, he still has character. He went to the University of Virginia. He went to Virginia, not Syracuse. I said that earlier. He went to the University of Virginia. His son was Thomas. God, I'm blanking on the name. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, he has a whole new life now. And he said, "I have more joy in acting and studying acting and helping people learn to be good actors than I ever had playing football." And he said, now this is me. He said, I heard in what he said. I think I could have spoken for him and extended his gratitude by saying, not only have I found something that is going to give me joy for the rest of my life and a purpose and a reason to get up in the morning, but I have also come in, I recognize now that where this has come from contains a source of joy that is even greater than this path that has been given to me to lead to itself. And so, you know, I've said to my son from the very earliest days, I remember when he called me standing in the bookstore of junior college, first year, going to enroll in some classes, bought his books, and he said, "This is all bullshit." He said, "I want to become an online professional poker player." And he calls me up and he says, "Hey, Dad, I'd like to drop out of college to play professional poker." And when he retells this story, he says, "It was one of the happiest days in my life when there was a little pause on the phone and you said to me, 'I wonder what took you so long.'" And he said, "You've always told me to follow my heart, do what I love, follow my passion, follow my instincts, whether it's golf, chess, or online poker," all of which he did at a very high level of success. And he said, now he wants to be an organic farmer. And I'm sure that will not be the last for him. Now he thinks that he and I need to have conversations about this very thing, finding your purpose in life, and make it an image of the Trinity, of the Father and the Son, having Trinitarian conversations, and have anybody else be the Holy Spirit just to drop by and ask a couple of questions and get us going, because we could talk about this stuff forever. And he's actually better at it than I am, if you can believe that. So that's down the road. But no matter what the activity is, so there's 2 keys, maybe 3. Becoming disillusioned with what I thought my life was supposed to look like, rediscovering my true purpose in life and that which fulfills me in a way that brings joy to me and others, and I don't even have to breathe hard doing it. And then realizing a step beyond that energy, that inspiration that gives me a desire to wake up every morning doing what I love to do is coming from a source that is pulling me to itself and will rocket me into an experience of bliss that is greater than anything I found either in my mind-made identity as an early person in baseball or my fulfillment in doing retreats and saying mass as a priest. There's something beyond that, which everyone has in their very heart, because it gives them a reason to get up in the morning. Even if I'm still suffocating in my job, there's something that is still motivating. There's still a seed of hope in there. The corpse is still alive for a reason, because that little homing mechanism on the pull of the transcendent is constantly going off. It's just an agony to see so many people living in misery and victimhood who have not happened upon their purpose in life and haven't realized in any self-conscious way that the desire for God or the desire for happiness within them is the life of God within them, working harder than they are, trying to show them the way to find that in this world and in the next. So, what time is it? Oh, we still got a little time. So, to talk about come back to the Eucharist for just a second here. So I'm doing this retreat last week up in Michigan, and we're not talking about religion at all. We're talking about how people grow. How do you become one with the source of things? We're really talking about the mystery of presence. When somebody knows nothing about God, and they don't want to talk about God, or they've been totally alienated by God and religion and the church, you can always start by, let's have a cup of tea. So I'll come back to that example again. What happens when I have a cup of coffee? In our country, you have a cup of coffee with somebody. So let's say somebody calls me up and says, Father, I absolutely hate the church. I kind of like you because you told me you got a son, and not many priests have a son. And my grandmother told me I should talk to a priest, but my cousin was abused by a priest, and I really don't want to, but I saw you and I didn't even know you were a priest. So you seem like a pretty good guy. Okay, let's have coffee. Let's talk. I said, okay, let's talk. And so we sit down and I say, so what's the story? And they tell me the story. And I say, how do you feel? And they say, I feel pretty good. I mean, you actually seem like you understand what I'm saying. And I say, I do understand what you're saying because I'm listening to you. And they have a kind of euphoric. Cups of teas are sometimes euphoric experiences. Why? Because we feel whenever we're with somebody who listens to us, we have already entered the kingdom of God. And you really don't have to go any further to discover God than to just reflect for half a second on what it feels like to be listened to. When another person is listening to you, that is the perfect image of the way that God is with the world and with you at every moment. We had a gospel this weekend where Jesus was talking to the people about praying. And I was about to say I would have loved to hear what other priests were saying about this, but I really wouldn't love to hear what other priests were saying about this because I know what they'd be saying about it. Okay, so let me tell you, set it up here a little bit because it dovetails with this notion of God as presence and God as present, quite apart from any religious language or talk about God, and quite apart from anybody participating in the sacramental mysteries. If you don't participate in the sacramental mysteries or in your marriage or in any friendship with the quality of listening, which is essentially openness and childlike availability, if you don't have that in anything that you have will not avail you of anything because you're not really there. You're off somewhere else. Even though you're physically there, you're not present. The power of presence is purely and simply the presence of God in every human person. And you have to go no further than the mystery of presence to talk to anybody about God and make more sense to them about God than anything you could talk about theologically or philosophically, even though I'm good at doing that too. And I should say, even though I love doing that also, because I think that's a great portal into the life of God. So here's the parable of Jesus, because Jesus is talking about this all the time, but the form of the gospel sometimes is a little deceptive. The parabolic form, when he uses parables, he says even at one point, I tell parables that those who see may not see, and those who are blind may see. Those who have ears will hear, those who don't will not. He even tells parables because he knows that his undiluted teaching is going to be too much for some people. It's going to cause them to reject him forever. If he gives them full strength godness, they're going to collapse. So it's like a mother putting medicine in applesauce. But the funny thing with the Jewish people was that the applesauce was the law, and the medicine was sweetness. So he had to put sweetness in stuff that tasted bad in order for the Jews to like it. So that's why so many of his parables retain the language of violence, even though the thrust of them is to make exactly the opposite point. And the parable in question is one of those that I'm going to tell you about. So for those of you who forget last week's 9 a.m. Mass, or those of you who never knew of such a thing, the gospel was Jesus tells his disciples, he tells them a parable about the importance of praying always and never losing heart. Okay, in a minute, I'm going to tell you what the parable is, if I can remember it. What was it?
The judge.
It was the judge. Okay, right. It was a judge. But just that first line, this is why I said I would never want to listen to another priest, because I doubt there was another priest, maybe in the world, well, probably in the world, but maybe Richard Rohr or somebody. But most priests, they look at that first line. Jesus told his disciples a parable about praying always and never losing heart. And so they're going to preach a homily on the importance of and in one of the other versions of this parable, Jesus does say, knock and it will be answered. Seek and you will find. Ask and you will receive, seek and you will find. And most priests and most people understand that to mean, if I don't succeed the first time, it's like, if you don't succeed the first time, try again. The image that people get from listening to that parable, and especially the way Jesus introduces it, or at least the way it sounds that he's introducing it, sounds like he's saying, keep at it here. Just as the widow had to knock on the judge's door at night and he finally woke up and took care of her. If you keep knocking on God's door, he's going to wake up one day and finally hear you, and he's going to come running, because those who are persistent in prayer and pray always without losing hope, eventually they'll wring it out of him. That's how it's normally preached, okay? And it's intended to be preached in exactly the opposite way, because why? It's the same parable, but it's told differently by all three evangelists. And in the one version, the woman comes to the judge at night and starts knocking and says, get up. And the judge says, well, so the judge wakes up and says, what the hell's the racket going on? He says, well, I'm a bad guy. I'm an unjust judge. I don't like anybody but this damn widow. Just to get her off my case, I'm going to go give her what she wants and get the hell rid of her. So he does. In that episode. And in this one too, the judge says, since I fear neither God nor man, but because of her persistence, I will answer her prayer. Jesus uses those as counterpoints to the way he is and the way his Father is. Because the concluding line in both of those parables is, if you who are evil, and he's speaking about the evil judge. If you who go and approach even your worst enemy, like the woman approached the judge, if you bug somebody, even the worst person in the world, long enough, they may not do it because they're good of heart, but even the worst person you can imagine will eventually give you what you want. If your worst enemies at some point are going to give you what you want, don't you think my Father will give you that much more quickly? Yes, I tell you, and much more swiftly than that. So when he says pray without ceasing, he means pray as if your prayers have already been answered before you say them. And how many other times does he say that? When you pray, don't babble on like the pagans do. Your Father knows what you need even before you ask. Consider the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. They don't even ask, and yet they are given what they ask for. Knock. When you knock, you've already answered your own prayer. And let me give you an example of that. It's the gospel from the week before. This is a good example of what Jesus meant by God answering our prayers even before we think to ask them, because the love of his Father is so different from that of the unjust judge. With the unjust judge, it takes persistence. With Jesus' Father, it takes confidence. Trust that he has already known your needs before you think to ask for them. And when you're asking for them, he's just shining light on what you've already received. You must awaken to the fact that you've already received the answers to your prayers. You just are still blind, and you don't have yet eyes to see how they've been answered. So here's an example that he gives to I'm giving to illustrate the preemptive answering of prayer by the one who created us. Listen, all the needs we have also, and even the difficulties we run into, are gifts from God to awaken us, to awaken us from the self-made identities that are bringing us misery, and to point us in the direction to the real purpose of our life that will bring us more or less continuous bliss. Every problem we encounter is a corrective in our journey to God. But we don't have the wherewithal enough to stop and have the confidence enough to know that my direction has already been assured. I'm just not seeing something here. I have to have a cup of tea with God to figure it out. But who wants to take that kind of pause? We immediately react and say, I've got to fix this. Instead of fixing it, why don't I ask, what is this saying to me? And where am I in all of this? And who am I in all of this? We must constantly be allowing ourselves to be redefined by an image of ourselves that we do not fully possess, but we do have indications towards it through the things that we hate, through the things that constantly get us in trouble, and through the things that absolutely inspire and excite and draw us forward. And when I start to look at those clearly, I begin to feel my path is not to be all things to all people. My path is not to do all things for all people. My path is to discover what I cannot not do and still be happy. So God is always one step ahead of us. It's like Hansel and Gretel. The problems in my life are just the breadcrumbs pulling me forward into bliss. And Jesus says, pray always and never give up hope, means take every step, knowing that every step is leading you closer. Don't give up at all. God has already done for you what you can't do for yourself. You just haven't awakened to it yet. Ask him to take the blinders off your eyes. So let me give you an example of the preemptive forgiveness and love of God. Forgiveness, we call it forgiveness because it's given before it's asked for. Okay? It's like paying ahead at Starbucks. That's what it is. Forgiveness, it's already been paid ahead. Okay, your road has already been smoothed out ahead for you. Your request for help here is one step short and $1 late, $1, 1 day late and $1 short. It's already been given. You're just afraid to take the next step in trust. All that being said, okay, so the week before was the 10 lepers. Okay, so you get these 10 lepers. They're approaching Jesus with their little bell, and they're maintaining the appropriate 30 yards distance that the law requires, so that 6 is it 6 feet?
No, he's just making a joke about it.
Yeah, it's 6 feet. I got a legalist over here. I'm telling you, it's 30 yards. I don't know what the hell it is, but it was a safe distance, because they thought that it wasn't just a matter of catching leprosy. You see, leprosy for them, or any illness, Lord, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Lord, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born with a withered hand? Oh, Lord, who sinned, this man or his parents, that his wife was caught in adultery? Although they attributed everything that went wrong to something somebody did wrong. And Jesus says, nobody went wrong here. In fact, this not only is this permitted by God, but this is actually designed by God for the glory of God. And I'm going to jump back and ahead here with one of the great quotes from Saint Irenaeus about why people commit sins and do evil. And he says, since he who forgives always existed, it was necessary that those who would do things that need forgiveness should be created, so that he who forgives would not exist in vain. All the forgiveness was given before there was even a world. So God's only desire is that people get through their mind-made selves and stop stumbling over false attempts to create themselves and allow themselves to be drawn into the identity that has been forgiven to them, given to them before the foundation of the world. So as the millennials say, it's all good. It's all good. We just don't have the eyes to see it. So the 10 lepers come and they say, Son of David, have pity on us. Now, Son of David, there's a good phrase. See, I could talk about this shit all day. Son of David. David was an adulterer. David was a murderer, and he was forgiven. God said, yeah, okay, you committed adultery. I see all that. I got it. I don't need a recitation of your sins. I already know what they are. I'm not condoning this behavior. I'm going to give you a little pat on the wrist, since as a Jew, you wouldn't understand anything less. If I did nothing, you'd wonder who the hell you were believing in. So I'll give you a pat on the wrist. That means that this temple you want to construct to me because I slayed Goliath for you, you're not going to be able to do that because you shacked up with Bathsheba, but I'm going to let your son Solomon do it. And I'll tell you what, David, for some reason, I just love you, and one of your sons, no matter what a schmuck you've been, one of your sons is going to sit on this throne in perpetuity until the end of time, because I cannot not love you no matter how hard you are, how hard you try to make me not to. And so David goes in and writes Psalm 51, "O Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner." And God says, stop the spiel. Stop it. Don't need it. Don't need to hear it. Thank you. It's a nice sentiment, but don't need it. I'm doing this because of me, not because of you, David. I cannot not be myself. And my son here is full of forgiveness. So how can I create a world that wouldn't need it? So that's why you're there, so he can be himself. That's really how the conversation in the Trinity goes. And you can see it in this parable with the lepers. So lepers come, Son of David, Son of mercy, Son of forgiveness, because they thought of themselves as sinners as well. Son of mercy, have pity on us. So what does he say to them? He doesn't say your sins are forgiven. He doesn't say you be healed, like Oral Roberts, be healed, come here, I'll touch you. Now he did touch some lepers, but in this case, he didn't say anything. He said, go show yourselves to the priest. And then on the way, one of them, realizing that he had already been cured, returned to give thanks. Okay, now, here, this is such an important revelation of God's reality, the mystery of God, the way God is in God's self. Jesus said, one of them, realizing he had been cured. Okay, When did the cure occur?
On the road to see the Pharisees?
No,
No?
no. The cure occurred. When were they alleviated of their problem? They were alleviated of the reason Jesus didn't pronounce anything is because when he saw them, here's the way to sum it up. When he saw the 10 lepers, like when he saw the blind man approaching him, the last words to the leper was the one who returned to thank him. Now, this is where priests go off the rails preaching about this gospel, because the leper comes back and says, thank you. And Jesus says, were there not 10? Where are the other 9? And priests turn that into a parable of expressing gratitude. And look how ungrateful the others are. It's not a parable about gratitude or ingratitude. The last line is the real puncher. Go in peace. He doesn't say, I have saved you. He doesn't say, I have cured you. He doesn't say, I have forgiven you. He said, your trust has saved you. Your trust has saved you. Why can he say that? I'll tell you the Trinitarian meaning of that. Go in peace. Your trust has saved you. Where did the trust come from? And when did the trust first enter those lepers? It entered those lepers when leper 1 said to leper 2, I hear the Son of David is coming through town today. Let's go see him. And when Jesus sees the 10 lepers, he immediately recognizes that they received the gift of trust in him from somebody other than him. Who? His Father, the Spirit. They had already been cured because they received the gift of trust. Their leprosy was a byproduct of their internal disorientation and lack of confidence that they could ever be something else. But in him, they found a confidence that they could be something else. And the confidence they received from the Father or from the Spirit, Jesus immediately recognized, my Father is already dissolving the leprosy. Go show yourself. Jesus knew that on the way they would be cured because he recognized that they had within them the same Spirit that was within him that makes him perfectly pure. Now, this is my interpretation, okay?
And is it significant that the one that returned was the Samaritan?
It is also significant that the one returned is the Samaritan, but for different reasons, and I don't want to use that, and that's very important, but it's not essential to what I'm saying right now. Let me give you another example of what I experience every Saturday afternoon. So I go and hear confessions, and many of them are just exercises in scrupulosity, but every once in a while you get a heartfelt, now I got to go to confession. See, I make no judgment. How do I know what a person comes in there with? But 2 things often happen in confession for me. So somebody comes in, tells me what they're feeling ashamed of. And I say, when did you feel a desire to come here to let me know this? Because you can see they're coming to show themselves to the priest, right? They're doing exactly what the lepers did. And I said, when did the idea of coming here to confess? Because sometimes I'll get a person. I had a person just last week, yesterday, in fact. Lady came in and said, bless me, Father, for I've sinned. It's been 10 years since my last confession. I said, why now? I said, this is great. Why now? She said, I just felt like it was time. And I said, when you felt like it was time, how did that make you feel? And she said, I felt a great release. She said, I realized I've been resisting something and I felt, because she came right at the end. She said, do you have time to hear my confession? I said, I got time for nothing else. And I said, when did you? She said, I just felt like it was time. And she said, I was a little nervous walking in the door, but I'm really glad I did it. And I said, do you see when the inspiration came to you to come to confession, something had changed in you fundamentally? And she said, yeah, I kind of felt that. And I said, all I'm doing is confirming that you've already received what you're looking for. And I can explicitate what you're looking for, and I will seal what you're looking for. But what I have to give you, you have already received. Another thing that I often say to people in confession is, how soon after you committed that act of adultery did you feel bad about it? Oh, Father, almost immediately. And I said, hey, do you notice there in that awakening, there's almost like two of you. There's the one who committed adultery, then there's the other one who immediately wished he hadn't. When God looks at you, the only one he sees is the one who wished he hadn't. Because that self is higher than the other self that has fallen. And the only self God created was the one who has the capacity to feel sorry for the one who has fallen, just like I only have a capacity to love you who have fallen. So anyway, those are experiences in confession to show you that the very first movements of change are the accomplishment of the change from the one who desires more than you that the change happen. The very first moments of change, the very first thought, how long am I going to live in this darkness, is the spirit trying to find the camel's nose under the tent to say, don't you see? The real you is aspiring to something this other you has gotten himself into jail through. Of course, then the question arises, how do I escape? And the question, the answer there is always the same thing they tell people in addiction: honesty, openness, and willingness. I have to be honest about how miserable I am. I have to be open about everything that I regret and feel bad about that I've done that has gotten me nowhere. And I have to be willing to take another suggestion and try something different, because nothing changes if nothing changes. And that means becoming like a little child. So the whole teaching of Jesus was become like a little child before you become such a disgruntled adult that you have no other choice. And even suicide is an attempt to find something better. And suicide itself is the impulse of God in a person saying there's got to be something better than this, or it can't get any worse than that. The person has just temporarily lost their capacity to step outside themselves and be honest about themselves. So they just want to do away with the whole thing. And so it's really a time of person not acting in their right mind, really. But who of us is most of the time? The only right mind that we have is the mind that recognizes most of what we're doing is not working. So it's a matter of expanding, and that right mind is the mind of God within us. And we have to surround ourselves with people who are honest, open, and willing about wanting to discover their true identity beyond the images of themselves that they've already made. And that means learning from other people's experience, but being honest with myself about what I like and what I don't like, and not trying to please anybody else, not being mean to anybody, but just having the courage to be other, and even other from what I thought I was supposed to be. So God is always drawing us into a deeper sense of our own uniqueness. Yes, we are all human beings, but nobody does being human like you do. Nobody does being human like I do. And even things like the priesthood or married life or any vocation or career, not all two engineers are alike, not all two priests are alike. A person's a person's genius is not their state of life. Nobody is a genius by being a priest. There are people who really know how to do the priesthood in ways that are divine. Others do them in ways that are pedestrian. But each of us is called to do something that looks divine in the way it's done. And ultimately, if we are just be ourselves, all we have to do is walk around and people will feel better. And once I learn to listen to myself, I can listen to others. I always try to bring it back to the simple act of presence. I mean, it's the greatest joy for us to gather, and let me kind of express myself like this, because I think it might be helpful to some of you, but it's what I need to do for me. You know, it's like recovery itself. People go to meetings, but they go there essentially because to fulfill themselves and to be the best self they can be, they have to do it. So I always say the key to your life is identifying that which you cannot not do and still feel like you're being true to yourself, because ultimately to be true to yourself is to be true to the one who made you. Ultimately, God's will for my life and what's going to give me the greatest joy are the same thing. But it's the ego or the sin or the darkness of our addicted behaviors. Excuse me. The shells that we've constructed for ourselves, they all have to be dissolved by fire. You know, I always compare it to a piece of Amish furniture that's been lacquered over 10 or 12 times. You have to put acid on it. Sometimes you have to take a blowtorch and burn off the exterior. The fire of God's love works through life. Life purifies us of all the BS. Not completely. That's why Catholics believe that purgatory, or what the early church fathers called hell, it was nothing other than the remedial fire of God. It was always medicinal. It was always restorative. It was more or less excruciating, just like detox from drugs is more or less excruciating. To get back to the original template of God's image and likeness that I am and you are, that requires the dissolution of every identity that the world or ourselves have given ourselves that is not of God. And when we get down to the naked truth about ourselves, we will be naked without shame, as Adam and Eve were in the garden. We will see the unvarnished truth about ourselves, and it will not be indicting. It will not be condemnatory. If there's a condemnation, it will be ourselves saying, oh my God, why didn't I live as my true self longer? And even that remorse will be burned up in a millisecond by God's redemptive love. God's love is fire. It's a consuming fire. St. John of the Cross says, imagine the human person, the normal human person, as a wet green log that you just bring in from the forest, and you throw it into the fire of God's Trinitarian love. All hell breaks loose. It starts to crackle. It stinks like hell. It smokes the room up. It brings misery to everybody. But if it stays in the fire long enough, it starts to calm down, and then it turns colors. First, it becomes orange. Then it becomes iridescently white, such that you can still see there's a log, and you can still see there's a fire, but they have commingled in such a way that the log and the fire look identical. Just like the burning bush of Moses in the desert, or Jesus on Mount Tabor being transfigured. So when I have found my stride, when I have found my right lane in life, when I've come close to identifying who I am and what relationships allow me to be most myself without suffocating me or controlling me or driving me absolutely bat crazy. When I've discovered that, I will be aglow. You say of a woman who's in love, she's glowing. She has her child, she's glowing. Glory, what we talk about glory, why we have halos on saints. And Our Lady of Guadalupe has this big penumbra of the sun behind her. It's all an image of the person who has been divinized by becoming one with God simply by being themselves. Okay. All right. It's God's way of telling me shut up.
Yes.
Take a breath.
One more thought. One more image. Listen, there's one infallible sign of a saint. Joy. There's no sad saint. There's no troubled saint. There are saints who grieve the sins of the world. The agony in the garden of Jesus is real, but it's a grief. It's not an anger. So the last image, we're at this retreat, and one of the retreatants says, okay, when we're living our true self and we're glowing with the glory of God, do we become God? And as I said earlier, we become God to the extent that we are capable of being God as humans. But I said, if you want another image, there's the log in the fire. That's John of the Cross. Another image from John of the Cross is a window. Think of your life as a window. It's filled with grime. Those are called your sins or your false self or your ego or your flesh. All those terms, sin, call it whatever you want. Your window is smeared with crap. And in comes the Holy Spirit, and in comes the cleaning crew, and they start cleaning the window, and they do such a good job after 75 years. No, really. They do such a good job that the window becomes translucent. And it's a bright sunny day, which is the love of the Trinity, and the sun is shining through the window, and it's as if the window disappears. And there's the key phrase, it's as if. The window and the sun are one, but the window is not the sun and the sun is not the window, but you cannot distinguish window from sun. That's another image of the person who is living their life in God. When you look at her, you think you're looking at something divine. And if she is free of ego, you are. And if you're looking at a beautiful woman who is not filled with the divine, you're seeing a creature of darkness, even though the beauty is there. And that beauty can be very deceptive. Finally, the last image, the one I used on the retreat, I said, imagine yourself created by God as a square of pure linen cloth, white. And imagine God as a vat of purple dye, indicating regality and kingliness. And imagine the incarnation as the divine dyer. No play on words there, because he did die. The divine dyer, he dips us in the purple of his Father and their Holy Spirit, and he pulls us up. And the cloth drips of the dye, and then you look at the fibers of the dye and the color of God, the color of divinity. You've been empurpled with the life of God, and it has actually saturated the fibers in such a way that you can no longer you can no longer extract or separate the dye from the fiber. We are the fiber of God's dye. And when we talk about the blood of Christ, that's like the divinity of God empurpling, penetrating, saturating, making crimson what is it? Crimson Tide. What am I looking
Crimson
for?
Tide.
Crimson Tide. Oh, God, I hate those people. But I love the color crimson. Anyway, we are crimsoned by God when we open ourselves. So, and everybody is a partaker of that divine glory, even a person who is so-called dead in sin. If we have the eyes to see him, we will still see the presence of God like a little pilot light in that person, just waiting to be turned up so that the whole person is dispelled of their darkness and filled with the glorious penumbra of God's divinity. So that's enough for today. We actually made it to the 1 minute before the top of the hour. It's such a joy to see my Notre Dame and Arizona and Louisiana friends. Man, those Cajuns are a different breed, boy, and I got to get down there sometime to learn real Christianity. But meanwhile, we'll settle for this. Glory, Father, and to the Son, to the Holy Spirit,
as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be.
Thank you all.
World without
God and
end.
amen. Stop recording.